Everyone has their own definition of feminism. Mine is women and men fighting for equality between the sexes. However, some people still see feminism as something that women do and not men. A very basic idea of feminism is women's rights. In the past, it's been women fighting for all women to have the right to vote, go to college, become doctors, lawyers, getting equal pay, which we still don't have, by the way, and much more. But feminism isn't only about protests and marches. It's also about everyone throughout history who fought and inspired others. People like Mary Wollstonecraft, who in 1792 wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Women, a world-famous piece of feminist literature. Gloria Steinem, a feminist journalist and activist who co-founded Ms. Magazine. Emma Watson, a world-famous actress and feminist activist who was a woman's goodwill ambassador at a United Nations event in 2014. There, she gave a speech on feminism and launched the He for She campaign. Artemisia Gentileschi, a famous Italian painter who is considered to be one of the most accomplished artists of the 17th century. Frida Kahlo, a self-taught Mexican painter whose art is best known for her self-portraits with connections to identity, the human body, and death. And Judy Chicago, a feminist artist, art educator, and writer known for her collaborative art installation pieces about birth and creation images, which examine the role of women in history and culture. Feminist art was an art movement that started in the early 70s. The movement itself started in the 70s, however, feminist art has been around for as far back as the 1600s at least. The MoMA defines feminist art as art that seeks to challenge the dominance of men in both art and society, to gain recognition and equality for women artists, and to question assumptions about womanhood. And there was a huge influx of art that did exactly that in the 70s. However, if you look at artists like Artemisia Gentileschi and Frida Kahlo, you'll know that it didn't begin in the 70s. Let's start at the very beginning. Artemisia Gentileschi was a painter in the 1600s. Back then, very few women were allowed to paint, but her father was a painter and he taught her. Her father taught her as much as he could and eventually hired Agostino Tassi to teach her more. This is important to know because of what he did to her and how it affected her work. Trigger warning. This next part might be uncomfortable to certain viewers as it mentions sexual assault. I will leave the words trigger warning on the screen for as long as it is mentioned. So if you want to skip over that part, mute the video and wait for the words to disappear. Tassi raped Artemisia. Rape wasn't seen back then as how we see it today. It was a woman's fault and near impossible to get justice for the victim. But he was still taken to court for what he did. Artemisia endured torture by thumb screws to see if her testimony was true or not. In the end, Tassi was found guilty and was sentenced to banishment from Rome. However, this was never enforced. Technically, she did get justice, but nothing really happened to Tassi and it still ruined her reputation. She was branded a promiscuous woman and men don't marry promiscuous women. After her trial, her life got a lot better. Her father arranged a marriage for her and she moved to Florence, Italy. The marriage didn't last, but her art career did. Italy is where she received the patronage of Cosimo II, the Medici Duke, and from there on her art career took off. She was the first woman to be accepted to the Accademia delle Arti del Disegno, Academy of the Arts of Drawing, and her work continued to thrive. She gained connections to royalty, scholars, and so many other important people. Feminist scholars have looked back on her and her work for examples of feminism during the 17th century. There is a whole section of feminist perspectives on her Wikipedia page. It says, quote, feminist scholars, for example, have elevated Artemisia to the status of feminist icon, which Benedetti attributed to Artemisia's paintings of formidable women and her success as an artist in a male-dominated field while also being a single mother, end quote. And as for her work itself, quote, feminist scholars suggest that Artemisia wanted to take a stand against the stereotype of female submissiveness. One example of this symbolism appears in her Koryska and the Satyr, created between 1630 and 1635. In the painting, a nymph runs away from a satyr. The satyr attempts to grab the nymph by her hair, but her hair is a wig. Here, Artemisia depicts the nymph to be quite clever and to be actively resisting the aggressive attack on the satyr. End quote. Let's move on from the 1600s to the 1900s. Frida Kahlo was another feminist artist in Mexico City in the early to mid 1900s. She didn't even originally intend to be a painter. It was a childhood hobby of hers. She was going to go to medical school, until she was in a horrible bus crash that left her with a lifelong pain and medical problems. She started painting again during her recovery. She is most known for her self-portraits, but what makes her work feminist art is her depiction of women. Traditionally, a woman's beauty was the focus in art, but she defied traditions in her work and in her life. There was a website titled Women in Art, and they wrote an article on Frida Kahlo. In it, they mentioned her and her defiance of beauty standards. Quote, defying female beauty standards. She didn't care to fit the norm. She kept her masculine features untouched. She didn't pluck her eyebrows and mustaches. She also exaggerated these features in self-portraits. However, she embraced her femininity by wearing colorful dresses and decorating her hair with braids and flowers. End quote. She was a feminist in her life and in her work. She made a lot of self-portraits, and you can see this in her work. She always painted herself with a unibrow and a mustache, which she did have in real life. Any other woman would have painted herself without either of those things. But she was never conformed to the beauty standards society imposed on women. However, her being a feminist didn't mean she couldn't have a feminine side. Frida's appearance is not the only way her art was feminist. According to the article, right underneath the part about beauty standards, quote, exploring real intimate female experiences in her work. Female experiences like miscarriages, pregnancy, menstruation, breastfeeding, infertility, sexual organs were private, but Frida publicized them in her paintings. She chose to paint raw and real experiences of women's life. Frida takes the viewer inside a woman's mind and let them examine the fears, suffering, and passions that were secretly hidden inside. End quote. Frida Kahlo's whole life, with a paintbrush or just living her life, was all about female empowerment. She was a born feminist. And last but certainly not least, Judy Chicago. Judy Chicago is one of the feminist artists to appear during the feminist art movement. But she's not just an artist, she's also an educator. She founded the first feminist art program in the United States at California State University, Fresno, formerly Fresno State College, and she acted as a catalyst for feminist art and art education. Arguably, her most famous piece is The Dinner Party, a large art installation that is a permanent piece in the Brooklyn Museum. I actually went to the Brooklyn Museum and I saw this piece myself. I took pictures of it while I was there. I've included them in the video. The Dinner Party is widely regarded as the first epic feminist artwork. It functions as a symbolic history of women and civilization. There are 39 elaborate place settings on a triangular table for 39 mythical and historically famous women. It starts with the first place setting for the primordial goddess and works all the way around till the 39th place setting set for Georgia O'Keeffe. Fun fact, Artemisia Gentileschi is the 25th place setting. Along with the place settings, there are 999 women's names on the floor of the piece. This consists of mythical, historical, and notable women. This is known as the heritage floor. Another fun fact, Frida Kahlo is on the heritage floor. Her name is near Georgia O'Keeffe's place setting. Each place setting is specifically designed and detailed to represent each guest. There is an image painted onto each of the place settings. They're meant to represent a woman's vagina. There are so many different examples of feminism in this work, I can't even list them all in this video. Luckily, you can get everything you need from the Wikipedia page and/or from the Brooklyn Museum website. This piece took 6 years to make and cost $250,000. And every penny was worth it because it's an incredibly important piece of feminist art. It holds the names of every important woman known at the time of its creation while representing and empowering them in various ways. Feminist art is throughout all of history. Artemisia Gentileschi, Frida Kahlo, and Judy Chicago are only 3 of the countless feminist artists. There are many more in history, and there will be countless more in the future.